we can actually have a look at that in Google Earth. Just for interest's sake, you know, one of these random things, maybe you see something you've never seen before. Launch in Chrome, which is Chrome, alright. And then any other interesting points here? Well, we'll see, we'll have a look around. Now it's first processing tons of rock there. Right, so they also say Eswatini. I wonder how long it will take for the tests to say Eswatini instead of Swaziland. So yes, Western Sahara, this is the former Spanish colony of Rio de Oro. So that was one of the 2 Spanish colonies in Africa. I don't believe anyone still speaks Spanish in Western Sahara. But if you are Spanish speaking and you want to visit Africa, then you can certainly visit Equatorial Guinea, which is a Spanish-speaking country. At least it's one of the official languages. Like most of Africa, the countries have multiple languages, so Spanish is more sort of the language of business and all of that. And very interesting, Equatorial Guinea has basically 3 parts to it. The largest section is on the mainland, but this is mostly forest, so very sparsely populated, which actually sounds quite ideal. It also has a very small little island down here, but the main island is here, Bioko, which is where the capital is, Malabo. So this is where you would most likely visit. And very interesting also, if you would like to listen to some of the music from there, I think it's Hijas del Sol. Just have a look. Yes, right there. This is really interesting. Then you can listen to what Spanish African music sounds like. They also do other languages as well. They sing in Bube and Spanish. So it's really interesting and I like their music. So just search on YouTube for Hijas del Sol. Obviously, if I play that now, then I'll get a copyright strike, so I will avoid doing that. But I really love their music. It's very upbeat and happy. So there is some Spanish African music for you. Yes, I just want to go back to Western Sahara. I don't think they will show the wall that Morocco has built here. It's kind of like, in a way, I know people will object. You know, anytime you speak about politics, you'll have people who very strongly disagree with your opinion. But it kind of mirrors the Israel-Palestine situation. After the Spanish left Rio de Oro, this territory was claimed by Mauritania and Morocco. And I think Mauritania gave up its claim later on. I don't know if they took a small part somewhere, but anyway, Morocco basically claimed all of it. And the domestic population there, those who did not agree with that, were basically pushed into the desert. We can have a look at Western Sahara. Images probably is the best. Right here, this is a very interesting thing. Now, of course, it's such a tiny image. You can also look that up if you are interested. But anyway, the main point here is that you can see over time Morocco claimed more and more land. And what they did was, this is probably a better one, they basically built a wall in the desert, which they monitor very carefully with the military and so on. And so they thereby control most of Western Sahara, but the Polisario controls the little strip in the desert still. And obviously that is unresolved. Here we can also see it better. So there's the Polisario held Western Sahara, which is very isolated, except for a tiny little strip down here that goes all the way to the coast, which is very peculiar. And then the rest is controlled by Morocco, occupied by Morocco. We can search for Western Sahara wall. So they took Trump's idea long before Trump even had his idea. And, well, it doesn't look very detailed here, but it's basically a wall with stations and troops all over the place, and the longest minefield in the world, I guess. Yes, the longest minefield in the world also accompanies that wall. So it's interesting, and there was, of course, fighting and all of that. It's generally calm now, but the situation is very much unresolved. And there's also strong regional tensions between Morocco and Algeria, because Algeria houses a lot of the Polisario people. You can see it on this map. Tindouf is the Polisario headquarters in Algeria. So that obviously has created decades of tensions between Morocco and Algeria. But anyway, on this map you can also see the Polisario territory goes on the strip on the bottom all the way to the coast, right there. I don't know why Morocco didn't just claim the whole thing, but anyway, there's a small little strip there. So let's go back to Google Earth, and it's also interesting, since I love borders, as I said in the previous videos from yesterday. If we just have a look, like, so this is now the border between Western Sahara and Mauritania, and it goes all the way here to this point, and then it goes through this peninsula, basically cutting it in half, which is also very interesting. Why didn't the border just continue straight on to the coast there? And basically, I think is this Mauritania's biggest seaport. There's the capital, Nouakchott. But anyway, this is a very important port for mineral exports. So the trains, actually, there's a documentary on YouTube that you can watch. I think it's called A Train Across the Sahara or something like that. And it's about mineral shipments, you know, trains going in Mauritania, where they take shipments of various ore to the coast for shipping, and it goes directly to this port of Nouadhibou, and we can actually see the train. I think that's the train line there, and then obviously it is shipped out here at the port, the Nouadhibou Autonomous Port. But just so interesting that right next door is the border with Western Sahara slash Polisario, because that's not occupied by Morocco, and it goes all the way down right to the point of this peninsula. So it's one of those random facts, very interesting thing in my opinion. Also in Mauritania you can see the Eye of the Sahara right there. Some other people, other YouTube channels have claimed this is where Atlantis is, but anyway, I'm not getting involved in that kind of debate. But this is an interesting structure in the desert, which you can actually see from space, I believe. So then also, let's think, Portuguese, you know, obviously we know the history of Africa, the colonial divisions and all of that. Actually, there's been a long-standing kind of practice in Africa not to change the colonial borders for the most part. And a few exceptions to that rule are the split between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and Sudan and South Sudan. But so yes, some of the countries still have, like for example, Portuguese as their official language. It doesn't necessarily mean most people in the country do speak it very well, but if you do speak Portuguese, you can certainly visit Angola and Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau right here, and Sao Tome and Principe, which is right here, these two islands. That's also a Portuguese, former Portuguese colony, but they still do use it as an official language. Then, of course, French African lands were lots and lots of places in the north, so you can speak French all over the place. Mostly not in southern Africa, because that was never really a strong French influence here. It's mostly English, except for Madagascar. And also interesting, the Comores Islands here. This is actually a chain of 4 islands basically, but only 3 of them are part of the Comores as a country. The 4th one is part of France, and there's also a long dispute here where the Comores claim Mayotte Island, but anyway, so that's a French island. The French actually have quite a few islands along the coast of Africa, including these 2 here. Europa Island, but I don't know if people live on this, I don't think so, and Bassasas da India, that's another one. And they also have Reunion Island, which is I've heard a very nice kind of tourist destination. Mauritius is right next door, which is an independent country, It was also part of France for a short while, but it's also been part of the UK. Then, of course, to the north you get the Seychelles. The main island is Mahé right here, with Victoria as the capital, so that tells you who was the colonial ruler there. And the Maldives are not really considered part of Africa, so we're not really going to look at them. What else could we see here? Something interesting perhaps. I've looked at Equatorial Guinea. Oh yes, the Gambia. It's a very interesting country. I did a whole report on their political system in part of my master's degree, one of my courses there, about the Gambia, where I analyzed their whole system of government and all of that. But this is interesting because the Senegal was a French colony, so obviously they still speak a lot of French there. But the Gambia was a British colony, and it basically just follows the Gambia River until you get to that point there. And so the whole country is basically just centered around this river, and the capital Banjul is right there. So one of the things I had to do is kind of just a side note for that report for my course. It was actually a political risk analysis course that I did, and it was good because I did some work in that field. But I pretended that I was representing a hotel chain that wanted to open up a hotel along the coast of the Gambia somewhere. Just, you know, it's just an exercise. And then I looked at how stable is their political system and how much are property rights respected and that whole story. But it's a little bit out of date now, since obviously things do change over time. Just to the south here is Guinea-Bissau, but just coming back to Senegal, it just fascinates me so much to think that if you live in the southern part of Senegal, you have to travel, unless you want to go through another country, you have to travel all the way around to get to the rest of your country. It's one of those interesting things. But Guinea-Bissau here, this was also a Portuguese colony. What interests me about this, and I would like to visit this one day, don't know when that will happen, just because they have all these islands in this kind of river delta here, and that does look so intriguing to me. We can just have a look at that. Images. So, you know, if you are a smart investor, for example, I don't have money to invest really, but if I were a very big smart investor, I would start looking at these places as the tourist destinations of the future, because I think Guinea-Bissau gets very little tourism really. It's not really known around the world, but and obviously there was a civil war and all sorts of things, but as the African Union is becoming stronger and sort of expanding, there's now the whole talk about the African Free Trade Association, which was signed recently, and obviously is going to take some time to go into practice, but that should also help to integrate the continent more effectively economically, because it's a sad fact, really a colonial fact basically, that most African countries trade more with foreign countries, such as European countries and so on, than they do with one another. And it's also because of lots of trade barriers inside the various countries. But anyway, just look at this picture right here. Isn't this a nice place to visit? I think so. It would be a really fascinating, unspoiled again, kind of coastline and all of that. Now, obviously, you would only want to go if it's really okay, this is Papua New Guinea, which is a totally different part of the world. But again, if there's enough political stability and you begin to remove the trade barriers and all of that, then this could become a real hub for tourism. And, you know, obviously some people do visit that, but it's a really rare kind of thing. It could be a very nice place. And obviously you get lots of wildlife, nice forests and all of that. So yes, that is Guinea-Bissau. Right next door you just get normal Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, and so forth and so on. Let's see, is there anything interesting else that I could talk about? Yes, there's the one thing I saw the other day. This might be also of interest to you if you want to do any traveling. It's a website, I need to think the name. I think it's visalist.io. Maybe I'm the last person in the world to find out about this, but anyway. It just helps to give you a good overview of where you can visit without a visa. So yes, obviously it picks up my default passport country is South Africa, because that's where I am. Let's go. Now again, if you are doing traveling, you obviously have to do your own homework and just make sure that the information is accurate. But this does help to give some idea also of the countries that I could visit without a visa. Not that that's a prohibitive barrier to have a visa application, but still it does make it more difficult. And that's also another interesting thing. When I went to Egypt last year for the conference in Alexandria, I had to go through a whole visa process, and it took a long time, and obviously it was expensive, unnecessary expenses in my opinion, because it's really just political nonsense. For example, I could visit Zambia without having to do that extra expense of doing a visa application. So it's all political. But this shows you again, in Africa we have lots of problems in terms of that, where you get this kind of barrier to travel and to trade and all sorts of things. But I think one of the components of the African Free Trade Association, which is going to be, when it really gets going, the largest free trade area in the world, one of the components planned for that is to have free travel also within Africa, and possibly a kind of African passport, but we'll see if and when that pans out. I just want to search this African Free Trade, so African Continental Free Trade Association. If you are interested in this sort of thing, then you can have a look at this. I think one country is still a holdout here. Yes, as of July 2019, only Eritrea has yet to sign the agreement. So all the other countries have signed on, and basically what it means, I just want to see they've obviously had enough members to ratify it. Background, status of negotiations, analysis. I don't want to go too much into this. But anyway, the main objectives of the it doesn't quite work as an acronym, FCFTA, are to create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business, persons and investments, and hopefully if you have a conference, and thus pave the way for accelerating the establishment of a customs union. That will be many years away, but this is one of the goals. It will also expand intra-African trade through better harmonization and coordination of trade, liberalization and facilitation and instruments across RECs and Africa in general. The RECs are the regional economic communities of Africa. I know this well because this was a cornerstone of my research study that I had to do recently. If we just have a look at that. So again, maybe, I know not everyone will be interested in this sort of thing, but if you have never really heard about this, and maybe it's interesting. Anyway, so basically there are 8 RECs in total all over Africa. So you have, this one is now still loading. We'll see. All right. So my REC that I live in, the Regional Economic Community, is SADC, Southern African Development Community. But you get many others like COMESA and ECOWAS and IGAD, that's in East Africa, and also the East African Community. And sort of the main goal of these economic communities is again to facilitate trade and economic integration and cooperation within these blocks. But they also have the problem, I think that there's a term for that, spaghettification. I think so. It sounds very much like a KSP rocket term. But it's because they start overlapping so much that it creates kind of a bureaucratic nightmare. So it's basically like spaghetti that just multiplies all over the place, all these different strands. So I think going more towards a continental integration is actually not a bad idea. So anyway, but this is still good, and I think one of the points that I want to bring across with this whole discussion is to show you some of the more positive things that are happening in Africa, since it is my home. So anyway, just looking back again at the visa situation, I can visit visa-free 69 countries, visa on arrival 26 and e-visa 15, but 114 I still have to pay visa fees and all of that, including most of Central and North Africa. So in Europe, doors are closed to me except in Ireland and Russia, which is interesting because that's one of the few that the USA can't visit without a visa. So yes, nowhere else here. Only Tunisia in North Africa. Israel and Palestine are both open. Iran as well. I can visit North Korea. I've looked at this website before for the USA, and it's actually banned, obviously, for the US to visit North Korea, but I could in theory do it, but there's no way I'm going to, but anyway. Also, New Zealand is closed off now. You need a visa, but when I visited there in 2011, you did not need one. So again, it's political issues and all that. Most of South America is open to me, except Colombia for some reason, and obviously the part of France there. And that's it. So Mexico as well, and of course all of North America. It would be interesting if we just have a look for United States. This will of course be a totally different situation. 135 visa free. Only one is visa refused. That's of course North Korea. Visa required only 34. So you really do have a lot of options. So Russia is one of the few that you, if you have an American passport, that you still need one. I want to see which is the best one. I think it's either Germany or Singapore or Japan or one of those. Let's just look for interest's sake. So Japan has visa required only for 33 countries, but still most of North Africa again. For some reason there's just, I don't know. Countries do need to work on this. You want to bring people in. You want to make it easy for them to visit. You don't want to create more barriers. So it's just like I was saying about tourism, the potential for tourism. There was something else I wanted to talk about. Oh yes, since we are obviously interested in space, I can show you the space port in South Africa that has not been used for launches in many years, but it is right here in the south. If we have a look, there it is, the Overberg Test Range. So that is where it is located. So if we just zoom out, so obviously if you launch to the east, you would miss the cities along the Garden Route and then go across the Indian Ocean. Or of course you can launch south as well. But yes, it hasn't been used in decades. I think this might be the launch pad area. I don't know. It's difficult to tell because it's not the highest detail. But there is the Overberg test flight, Air Force Base kind of thing. I don't think it's an Air Force Base. FAOB. I don't know what an FAOB is, but Test Flight and Development Center. Let's just have a look at this. Test range. So yes, there's still kind of satellite tracking that's happening there. So it is still an active place, but there's no launches that happen from there like it used to be back in the 90s. So there's at least a potential for that to happen again. Of course, if I just search South African rockets. Hey, my video is actually the first one to be recommended. Hey, that's interesting. Anyway, we're not going to delve into this too much now. It's just an interesting factoid there. So, yes, that was that. I need to think, was there anything else? Something we could explore here or look at? It's basically just that, I think. This is probably now too long already, but I'll split the video up into parts again. Also, Morocco, it's interesting that Spain still has various territories in North Africa along the coast with Morocco, and it creates this kind of situation where Spain obviously claims Gibraltar, but then Morocco says it's kind of hypocritical because Spain still has a multiple range of territories here as well, which are claimed by Morocco. Where's the other one? Melilla, I think. Oh yes, right here. And I think that's actually where the Spanish Revolution began, in the city of Melilla. Then there's also some other rocks along the coast which are controlled by Spain. Right here, this is the most interesting one to me, again because I like borders, or at least I find them interesting. Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera used to be an island controlled as kind of like a fortress by Spain, but because it's so close to the coastline here, over time sand was kind of built up here, so now it's connected, so the border is right there. This is basically one of the shortest international borders in the world. And so yes, that's another little Spanish holdout there. We can actually search for that. De Vélez de la Gomera. Yes, so that's what it looks like right there. So it's interesting to think that's Spain and that's Morocco, and it's just a bit of sand in between. So yes, be interesting to control something like that individually, like what's the thing called? Sealand, I think, this sort of microstate thing. You can actually have a look at Sealand. I think is it somewhere here? It's obviously a platform in the ocean. It's interesting that they say Sealand UK, but I don't think that's what it is. No. Principality of Sealand. Become a lord or lady. You can actually buy a title there, but it doesn't mean anything. So yes, that's a micronation. Let's see, it's off the coast here somewhere. Oh well, I was also thinking if if the raid on Area 51 goes south, then people should seek sanctuary on these little Antarctic islands or Southern Ocean islands. Let's have a look at Area 51, since it is the topic of choice for the moment. Unfortunately, I can't attend the raid because I kind of live on the other side of the world, but anyway. So it's one of these flats. There it is, has Area 51. I don't know what they're doing in there, but anyway. I think there's probably nothing of real interest going on there. Just because everybody knows about it. If it was a real secret, then nobody would know about it. So if something was going on here, they moved it a long time ago. And you can actually see they have a baseball field there. So what kind of nefarious thing can happen with a baseball field? I don't know. Maybe it opens up and there's some underground cavern there or something. Also interesting, speaking of these little foreign claims on things, in North America there's still a little French holding. Obviously you get Canada here and the US, but there's a little tiny outpost of France, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. I can't really pronounce that properly, but anyway. So these two islands were left to France after the... What was it called? Was it the 7 Years' War, where they lost like all of the lands in the Ohio and all of that? But I remember, because I studied this for my master's degree, I wrote a passage about that. They left in the peace treaty. They left France, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, because of the fishing grounds around here in Labrador, and France wanted access to that, and so they left them this little piece of land here. So it's so interesting. You think, you know, there's actually 3 countries present in North America, but mostly people just think of 2. So it always fascinates me to think, if you live your life in a place like this, what would it be like? You can just drop down here just for interest's sake. And it looks nice and green. Well, that's interesting, a nice little walking path here. Might be another unexplored tourist paradise, possibly. So let's see if we can escape there. Speaking of tourist paradises, I would still one day like to visit Bora Bora, but that would be a very expensive proposition. Let's see if I can find it. Probably just going to be best to search for it. French Polynesia. Just because of how it looks, it's so exotic, but anyway, just to get there would be quite an extreme flight coming from South Africa. And one of the other problems again with the African countries altogether is that it's oftentimes more expensive to travel from one African country to another, especially by air, but I mean by land it's thousands of miles, so who can drive that through many different countries all the time? So obviously you'll tend to fly, and the air prices are so that it's often cheaper to fly to London or Frankfurt or one of those other big hub destinations than it is to fly to Kenya or Tanzania or somewhere. By the way, also, why did Tanzania get its name? It used to be two parts here. This used to be German East Africa back in the day before World War I. But the mainland part was Tanganyika, and of course you have Zanzibar. I think Zanzibar was the location of the shortest war in history. There's a video on YouTube on that. But so obviously these two places were blended together to create Tanzania, so as the larger colony then, which was later administered by the British. Also, the thing was, this shows you again the arbitrariness of the borders in Africa. I think this border was created because obviously this was British and this was German, and they decided, well, the Germans should also have a mountain, so they drew the border around the Mount Kilimanjaro, because the British already had Mount Kenya somewhere. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to find that now. But anyway, so they wanted to give the Germans a mountain as well. So they just drew a straight line and curved it there, and another straight line. That's also why you'll find lots of these straight lines, especially with Namibia and so on. Just random borders, never mind who lived there, just cutting the various groups off from one another and things like that. So that is still obviously an enduring problem in Africa, but as I said, the tendency has been to keep the colonial borders for the most part, I suppose as a kind of precaution against everything just fragmenting into pieces, because it's difficult enough to try and do nation building in these very diverse kind of countries, but if you start having little micronations, or I don't know, it might just degenerate, violence and chaos and all of that. Somalia is a prime example, again, because just another colonial influence again, where North Somalia here was British and the rest was Italian. And even now, Somaliland claims independence from the larger Somalia. And it's just, it's difficult to create complex, diverse nations, and I mean my own is a very good example of that. We obviously still have enduring issues with that, but yes, we try. See the Kruger National Park here. This is also a place I'd like to visit one day. This is a very famous, of course, wildlife park, and you can see lots of wildlife there. 19,400 square kilometers, established in 1926. So yes, someplace I still have to go. Anyway, comrades, this was an interesting trip. I could just go on forever. I was just thinking, now there's the quadrupoint between Namibia, Botswana, Zambia and Zimbabwe, where four countries basically come together. But there's a little strip here with this bridge, as you can see. I think they're actually building it here. Yes, they're still building it in this image. I don't know if it's finished now, but it's a link between Botswana and Zambia. So it's basically cutting Namibia from Zimbabwe. But anyway, so four countries coming together almost at the same place. And this is again another evidence of the kind of arbitrary colonial borders, because German Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, was given this kind of Caprivi strip, and the reason for that was so that they would have access to the Zambezi River right here. But then obviously that created problems and conflicts again, and there was an issue with Caprivi land looking for even independence from the rest of Namibia. I don't know how things are today. I think it's generally peaceful now. Independence. So there's the Caprivi conflict, and it's because of the way that the borders were drawn. So obviously the more natural place would have been to just draw the border there, but it was extended this way to give access to the Zambezi. So yes, there's the Cahora Bassa, one of the biggest dams in Africa, if not the biggest. Then there is Lake Kariba, which is another dam. And of course you have the one in Egypt. That's probably the biggest then, Lake Nasser, Aswan Dam. Anyway, comrades, I'll end off here. Otherwise I'm going to talk the whole day just about random places in Africa, even though I find this endlessly fascinating. Anyway, I'll see you again in another video. So have a fantastic and relaxing day. Keep your stress levels low. In South Africa, tomorrow is a public holiday, Women's Day. So I think it's worthwhile to mention that, Women's Day 2019. And it's an International Women's Day, but it's actually a public holiday in South Africa. So here's a shout out to all the women. I actually wish this was a public holiday all over the world, obviously primarily for women, but for everyone really, so they could show some appreciation. But yes, the thing here also in South Africa specifically, the reason why this is celebrated is because on the 9th of August, actually want to just go back, when is International Women's Day? Oh, that's on the 8th of March. So anyway, that should still be a public holiday, but the reason why it's the 9th of August here is because on the 9th of August 1956, about 20,000 women of all races marched on the Union buildings, that's where the president is situated, to protest against the discriminatory pass laws which had restricted the movement of black people in the country. This march has been celebrated since 1995. So a long history, of course, a struggle against colonization and apartheid. That's, again, this could, be more of the kind of negative history of South Africa, but that's not all there is to the country. So I think that's a very important point to make. We still live here, and it still obviously has its problems, but it's also still a good place to live. Let's hope it stays that way. I wanted to say something else now. Public holidays in general, that was another thing. Why not? If you're not interested in this kind of stuff, you wouldn't be watching by this point. Anyway, just as a comparison again, wherever you live, we can see which days are public holidays in South Africa. So obviously there's New Year's Day, there's Human Rights Day on the 21st of March, there's Good Friday on the 19th of April. Obviously the dates will change year to year, but the days will be the same. Family Day is on 22 April. Freedom Day is on the 27th of April, when we had our first democratic election in 1994. Workers' Day is on 1st of May. Elections, of course, this changes. It's because we had an election this year, so that day is also a public holiday. So obviously this is not recurring. Youth Day is the 16th of June. Also what happens is, if a public holiday falls on a Sunday, then the next day, the Monday, is the public holiday. Otherwise there's no point, because most people don't work on a Sunday anyway, and the point of a public holiday is so that you can have the day off. National Women's Day, of course, is tomorrow. Heritage Day is the 24th of September. The Day of Reconciliation, which is of course a big theme in this country, is the 16th of December. Of course, Christmas Day and the Day of Goodwill, or Boxing Day, as it's more generally known in the British world, I guess. Speaking of countries, the side of the road on which they drive. That's now very poorly searched, but maybe it will give us a map. Yes, so basically again you can see Africa is pretty divided here. Most of southern and eastern Africa drives on the left, including South Africa, but the rest all drive on the right. So it's interesting because in some cases like Angola, because it was a Portuguese colony until 1975, I think, it obviously also drove on the right, but the same applied to Mozambique, but because it's surrounded by left driving countries, they also switched to left driving. Or they stayed on left driving when Portugal switched to right. I don't know, it's a complicated story, but anyway. So yes, here you can also see it. It seems like Malawi is a right country, but I don't think that's true. Interesting. Left, yes, so that's incorrect. That it looks like Malawi is on the right. Anyway. So I think now I'm going to really wrap up, comrades, and I will see you again next time. Have a fantastic day.